we talked about when I joined Power to Fly. And granted, we're nowhere near like the large corporate structure idea, but it can feel so kind of similarly disorienting when you're not in a physical location with any of the rest of the team, right? It's very easy to just see a sea of names and faces and titles and not really know. Did you have any kind of guidelines for when you were going out to like make these connections? Was it just people that you organically worked with throughout the business, or did you have any sort of structure or plan, around that?
So initially, I let it happen more organically, right? I just wanted to see emerge like who the touch points were and who I was interacting with. But then I think once I got my feet wet, then I was able to become a bit more intentional and try to really figure out, maybe who some of the leaders were within those groups, and also which teams seem to work together. And then the last thing is also identifying people who maybe are in the same functional area, but maybe different groups in the organization, to try to make those connections, to understand, even when you're brand new, you're always thinking about the next step in your career. And so understanding where people may have the same functional areas or skill sets as you, but in other areas in your organization, becomes really helpful tool to start to navigate, in a large corporate environment.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So when it comes to those making those connections, as you are continuing and kind of like trying to maintain them over time, do you have any guidelines for how you manage that, especially if you are onboarding into a new org and there's so much else going on around you?
Yeah, I think you have to make the time and space for it, right? And be intentional about it, that people aren't going to just come knocking at your door or ping you, and so setting some time aside every week where maybe there's some intentional touch points, one-on-ones with certain individuals, and also leaving space to continually do that with new people in the organization, right? People you haven't met before. And I try to maintain that type of structure for myself at least a couple of times a month, to set aside time to make sure I'm connecting with maybe people I haven't had the chance to connect with before.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. All right. So we started to touch on the idea of, being a remote employee. And one of the things that I've found in my remote roles is that sometimes there's not a lot of structure or a lot of like published protocols for the communication process. So if you are managing like kind of cross-functional collaboration across fully remote teams, what are some of the tricks for doing this successfully?
So, I think, when you're trying to collaborate across remote teams, understanding the landscape and also thinking about what the communication norms are within your organization. Every organization is different. Just because you're a large corporation doesn't mean every large corporation operates the same way. Some organizations rely heavily on things like Slack or other IM tools. Other organizations are much more formal around their communications. And so I think, something as you're navigating with your own teams, if you're finding it difficult and you don't really know how do you create those connections, or you'd like more structure in the communication, it's okay to make suggestions and reach out either to your manager or other peers and say, hey, what if we start a Slack channel? What if we, make sure every Monday morning we touch base and we're all aligned on the goals for the week? So, I think there's nothing wrong with coming up with ideas and suggestions. I think the one thing that I bounce it with is, you want to make sure you're also offering to do some of the work, right? Like if you're going to suggest, why don't we put a new framework for communication in place to try to keep us better connected? That's somebody has to do that. And if it's not a particular person's role or job, you may think about how can you contribute to creating that structure or offering those ideas. The other thing is also, even though folks are working in primarily, remote or hybrid working environments, I do think coming together, even if it's once a year, makes a huge difference in terms of connection for team members. And, depending on your organization and where it's located, I think that most organizations are trying to do that, even if the whole organization is fully remote, because they recognize the power of those personal connections when you get to be together in a room.
No, I think that's a really, a really good thing to highlight there. And I think you're right. It kind of keeps circling back to what we have told companies, even before the pandemic, before so many companies were forced to go virtual or figure out how to do a hybrid setting, is that, working in a completely virtual world, or working, across a global team or globally distributed team, is not impossible. It just requires a little bit different prep. It's not even really more. It's just different than the way you would structure things, or the way you would prepare things if you were all in a physical location. So I think you're right. And I very much love your flag there. If you're going to suggest new protocols or new processes to do, like, give yourself part of that, like an assignment within that. Because I remember being handed down like, oh, this is how we're going to do things now. And I just remember thinking, like, have you tried this? I know you haven't tried it. Like, this isn't going to work. And I really want it to, but it'd be greater if you could see why it's not going to work firsthand.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Okay. So let's talk communication strategies. Do you have a go-to strategy that you use when you are trying to make sure that teams across a project are aligned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that usually what happens is the teams are looking for role model behavior, right? So, if I'm working with a partner across the organization, I reach out to my peer and make sure that, we're really modeling the behaviors that we want the rest of the team to model. And those are things like aligning on priorities, celebrating successes consistently, and also, if we have to deliver difficult messages, and set expectations, that we're doing that jointly and consistently. And I think if the team sees alignment between, the leaders in those organizations, it makes it easier for them to rally behind and understand expectations, and really feel that they're part of a harmonious experience. But also, it's clear to them that they're not getting multiple different messages from different parts of the organization, which is, I really do feel, where at times collaboration can fall apart, because, people feel confused if they feel like one person is asking them to achieve X and another person's asking to achieve Y. It can become overwhelming for employees to navigate, well, which direction are we going in? So, that's really the approach that I've taken.
I like that. And, it does make a lot of sense that you want that consistency. And it also reminds me of, like, kind of the importance of creating that trust in your manager, or like trust with, in your direct reports, so that they do, even if you are not able to be fully transparent about what's happening, they at least have that you have that foundation of trust built up, so that there is some of that, benefit of the doubt, or a little bit of wiggle room there to be like, no, this is what we're going to do. I know, like, it will come together. Trust me, I have your back. And I think, that very much goes to the communication aspect, and, trying to be that person that everybody depends on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think trust is a good topic, because I think that plays a big role here. And, it takes time to develop trust. And so I think part of that is for people, to have some patience, and that works both ways, right? So trust in, maybe leaders in the organization, but also trust in members of a team that are coming together for the first time. And I think, a good way to try to think about building that trust can really just be demonstrating reliability, and, sticking to your actions, and really showing trust versus saying, trust me, goes a long way.
Yes. Ooh, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I'm like stuck on that sentence now. So I like that. Thank you. Okay, let's talk some kind of challenges or hurdles within this communication. Are there any subjects or issues that you found to be, kind of cause the most difficult interactions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest obstacle that I've observed and faced, at least within our organization, is really around rewards and recognition. When oftentimes when projects or big collaborative efforts are put together, they can often be sort of outside of people's core sets of responsibility. And if folks aren't clear on how participating in this collaborative effort is going to impact how they're evaluated and how they're contributing to success of the organization, it makes it difficult for them to buy in and really support the initiative. And I think, so defining that upfront can make a huge difference and really sort of clear that ambiguity, I think, for people participating in the program, to make sure that they feel supported and that they know that they're contributing to something that's going to lead to not just success for the organization, but success in terms of how they're being evaluated in their performance for their individual contributions.
Oh, I like that.
So, and then there's just a couple of others, I think, is, when roles are not clear for people, right? So at times when you get a new team of people together, there's a lot of work to be done. It can be a cross-functional team where people are working on with different skill sets, but even within that, who's going to take ownership and responsibility for certain actions and activities? And if that's not defined, it becomes hard to have momentum to move forward.
Yeah, I think these are really good issues. Could you give us an example of, how this situation presented itself to you and the method that you took to correct it? I think that kind of illustrative examples can be really, really helpful for people who maybe have not been in this position before.
Yeah, sure. So, the current role that I'm in, the way that we're organized at Moody's is we have different operating units that are responsible for producing different products and different content sets. But the Workflow Solutions team that I lead actually sits directly in between two operating units, where we have one side of the house helping to contribute in building technology and the other side of the house focusing on product strategy and go-to-market strategy and product design, right? And I'm saying that very clearly and articulately now, today, but I think when the initiative was first coming together, it wasn't clear how each group, members from each team, were going to contribute to that success. And it probably took us about 8 months of trial and error in terms of, one, how we organize the team, and even just the titles and roles that we gave to people to help create clarity over and avoid duplication of efforts and, make people clear on how, on an individual basis, they were going to contribute to the success of the program.
I think, okay, so we had been talking prior to to our session starting today about one of the other questions, and this actually, hearing you say that, kind of ticked something in my brain. This person had written in saying, what are your main tips for cross collaboration without overstepping, or to help show that you're a trustworthy partner? And this I think is what maybe this person meant by overstepping. If this is your question and we're not tackling this in the direction that you intended it, let me know in the chat. I would love to make sure that we get you the answer you came for today. But so let's tackle that kind of idea of that overstepping. To me, that kind of sounds like what you're describing in terms of like duplicating work, or people not being clear on what is their responsibility versus what is someone else's responsibility. So I think that is, that's really, really interesting to kind of think about that idea of overstepping, because when we first read that question, we were both like, what do you mean overstepping? Not quite sure how to proceed there. We also have a comment from John in the chat here. John says, I often hear that orgs and their employees suffer from burnout and attrition, particularly when in remote environments. What are your thoughts about improving that employee experience? Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about what burnout or attrition might look like across a global team. Do you have tips that you follow for trying to make sure that remote employees are not at risk for things like burnout?
Yeah, I mean, I think the burnout factor is real, but we need to all draw boundaries and set realistic expectations for, timeframes and timelines for when work can be produced. And I think, when leveraging a global workforce, sometimes, you have people working in a lot of different time zones, and there can be calls on people's times outside of normal business hours, and that can become just draining over time. So we try to be super conscious when we're working in a global team of a couple days a week, maybe one group needs to be online late or another group needs to log in early to ensure that no one team is consistently stressed in those situations. So those are, some tips that we take, and I think also, encouraging people to use their time off. Companies provide, especially large corporations, provide great benefits and great access to paid time off, and employees should definitely use that time off. Just be thoughtful and plan ahead and schedule and chat with your manager about it. And usually, everybody's extremely encouraging around making sure you set that time to reset, whether it's 1 week every few months or you take it in a longer block, whatever works for you and your organization.
The one thing that I think is a really good point that you made there is that idea of setting those boundaries. I think that is not something that most of us are set up to do. Most of us have, we either didn't have any idea prior to the pandemic because you weren't working remote, or maybe like me, I went remote the year before the pandemic, and I still had a lot to learn about, making sure that I was respecting my own time. Because I think a lot of us discovered it. Once you're at home and you're out of that office feeling, it already kind of feels like you're not working, right? And so people very much overcompensated in a lot of ways, either because they felt the pressure to be at work because they weren't in the office, so they needed to overproduce or produce more. Or we saw a lot of people that dove into work because there weren't any other like social distractions. There was like a kind of a lack of stuff to do. And so I think that is a really good point to set, is that, it is important to have that work-life balance, but it's not just on the org, right? It's on people to know what their needs are and to be able to assert those boundaries, or even just, have that open trust and communication with their manager to say, hey, here, I'm not having a good work-life balance. Can we take a look at like what I'm doing and see if there's better ways that I could be like spending my time, or whatever. So I think that's really a good highlight from the answer you just gave. Thank you for touching on that.
No problem.
Let's see. Ooh, this is a good one. Okay, so we just got a question in the chat. This one's anonymous. This person says, how can I navigate a high stress situation where my role is to support and collaborate with a team when that team is not aligned internally? So this is a really good one. So let's talk about this. If you are not in a position of being able to control the team, and it's a high stress, situation, how would you handle this?
So I think the most impactful way to highlight is to be specific, right? When we say the teams are not aligned and you're feeling stressed and frustrated, I think getting concrete around very specific examples and actions that either, that team is taking, or where you don't have the clarity or the information that you need that to feel that enables you to be successful, it's perfectly acceptable and encouraged to ask for it, right? But if it's just, sort of going to your manager and saying, this is frustrating, I'm annoyed, and I'm stressed out, those aren't really actionable things that somebody can help you navigate through. So make sure, that you think about what are those actionable items that somebody can help you navigate through.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really good point. You can't just bring somebody like, hey, everything's a mess. This is all on fire. Help. Yeah, I like the idea of having that kind of proactive. It also harkens back to what you said earlier about like, if you have an idea of a new process or something, like be proactive with it. Hey, this is something I want to participate in as well. I think that's a really good through line that, has kind of arisen in this. Okay, so we have 30 minutes left in today's chat. I want to make sure that we are saving time for audience questions. So if y'all have more questions that you want to submit, maybe we're talking about a subject and you want to dive in even deeper. Maybe we're talking about a term or an idea that is unfamiliar to you and you want us to kind of break that down. Please feel free, y'all. You took the time out of your day to be here with us. We want to make sure you get rewarded for that and get the answers you came to today's event to get. All right. So we had a lot of questions that were written in with people in kind of very specific situations. This person says, one of my program's cross collaborations is with a department that is not always efficient, and missed deadlines can absolutely impact me negatively in this partnership. Without being a nuisance, how can I help to step up their game so that our program can run smoothly? So this is kind of along the same lines, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to work with a team that you can't really control.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, my suggestion is really similar here. So it's try to identify what it is that you think is making this team inefficient, and not, have to be aware that not every team operates the same way. So maybe the team you were trying to work with has different norms in terms of they need manager sign off, or they have more layers of folks they need to keep in the loop. That potentially slows them down in their ability to deliver information that you need. And I think once you're able to identify what is actually causing that inefficiency, the only thing you can really do is plan for it. So once you know it's going to happen, I think, you really can take on the responsibility of building that into the plan, but then also approaching them with what are some remediation plans up front for when missed deadlines happen. And then, I think the other item I would highlight is, are they clear that and understand the impact of their actions, right? So when they miss a deadline, do they know what that impacts and how it's affecting the rest of the organization? Because I think sometimes people just aren't aware of the impact of their actions. And once they do understand that, they're able to more easily sort of come to the table and figure out, well, how can we make this so we don't cause those ripples throughout the team and throughout the program?
I very much like that statement there. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think it is very important to have that communication, but to kind of harken back to what you said a couple questions ago, be curious, ask the questions. Just because your team runs differently than theirs does not necessarily mean that the way your system works is superior, or that it will even work for this other group. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, when you're talking about trying to account for things like, whatever their internal or their specific issues might actually be, the person that wrote this question in said that theirs specifically was short staffing. So if that's the situation that you're working with and you're trying to work around it, is that just as simple as like building in time buffers, to give them a little bit of extra space to make their deadlines? Or do you think, is there some other way that you would handle something like a short staffing issue in another team?
Yeah, I think there's two approaches. So the one is the first you mentioned, right? And I think it's also being transparent around expectations for delivery, right? So if somebody is imposing a deadline on you to deliver by a certain point in time, having that open dialogue around it's not realistic. And I typically like to use facts to help highlight these points to people, because I think, it makes it much clearer. So, if you're trying to build software and you're trying to make it to a release schedule, there's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so much production that individuals can have. And so it's a numbers game, and you can do the math and you can easily sort of demonstrate why maybe some of these deadlines, need to be stretched or moved given the capacity that you have. But the other way is to try to be creative and think of, well, how can we increase capacity? Are there other people maybe within our own team who have skill sets that can help supplement some of these activities? Or are there other activities that those folks have on their plate right now that can be, offloaded to other individuals? So trying to come up with creative solutions if, deadlines are fixed and really can't be moved is, there's a lot of different ways to come at it.
I like that. Okay. We're getting some great questions in the chat thread here, so I'm going to try and get to some of these. Chriselle has asked, how can you bring up discussions around privilege and power dynamics that you feel are impacting the overall morale of a collaborative group? Okay, so Chriselle, let me know, chime in here. Are you coming at this from a manager perspective or from a team member perspective? Because I think that's probably going to give us two different answers. But let's start from a managerial perspective. How could a manager raise these? Okay, Chriselle says team member. So let's talk about a team member. If you are a team member and you feel like there are some of these issues at play within your collaborative group, so not just the one team, how would you as a manager prefer people bring this up?
So, I think that, again, just going into the details of the specifics of the situation, and I think where it's perceived that maybe one team or one manager has more power than the other, and is that dynamic really there, or is it just being observed? And so I think it almost goes back to the answer I gave a few questions ago about, I would make sure that myself and the other manager were aligned on priorities, right? So if somebody raised this as a concern to me, I would reach out to the manager of the other team and make sure that we were aligned on our priorities, and that message was being delivered consistently to the team to help kind of reduce some of that friction. I think that at times, what the perception that could be happening is really just maybe more around competing priorities that managers can have on their plates. And so the collaboration effort isn't always number one for everybody. And I think that can also sometimes cause the friction. And I think, having an open dialogue around the prioritization of the collaboration over other sort of individual team goals is important as well, because that's, I think, what drives a lot of that friction ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And if you've got follow-up questions on this, y'all, please feel free, write them in here. We'd love to keep breaking down these questions for y'all. Okay, Gabe has a really good question in the chat thread. What kind of initiatives would you suggest for an organization or team working remotely to help build trust and rapport? This is a really, really good one. It's something I feel like we talked about very early on in the pandemic, and then people kind of got it under their belts and then maybe got a little bit like lax on stuff like this. Have you tried anything before? What have you seen work?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the pandemic, we were doing a lot of this, which is making space to just have fun and be silly online together. There doesn't always have to be a purpose, and giving people the space to open up and get to know each other, as individuals, just outside of what's your work contribution. And I do feel like the Zoom environment is not so conducive to that, especially, there's no buffer time. You're either here or you're not here. It's very binary, right? You click your button and you disappear from the screen. So, there's fun games you can play. We do an ugly sweater competition, and we post it all in Slack every year, and everybody votes on it. So it's finding ways to connect and get people to show their individualism, and maybe sense of humor a little bit through some technical channels.
Yes, I very much like that. I very much appreciate the idea. I think Power to Fly, we did a bunch of us were really into Drag Race at the start of the pandemic. And so we had sort of like Drag Race themed sort of things. We did like Eleganza was a theme for a Friday morning meeting, and everybody was in, ball gowns or whatever the heck they had in their closets. And so I very much like that idea of making it, yes, you want people to relate to each other, across these teams, but it doesn't necessarily have to be work focused. If you're trying to build that camaraderie and build that trust, stepping outside the box is a really, really good way to do that. You're not limited to some of the stuff that you are limited to in person. So I think that's wonderful. Okay, so we had a lot of people that are looking ahead to things like an interview setting, and they wanted to find ways to talk about their abilities to cross-collaborate within the interviewing process.
Yeah.
So how would you recommend people kind of highlight this for recruiters or hiring teams that they're talking to?
So I think one thing is, opening up your mind to what cross-collaboration can actually mean, that it doesn't have to be one definition literally about working with somebody in another team. It can mean even working within your own area, but with cross-functional groups. It could mean working with people that are from different generations in the workforce, older generations and younger generations. It could mean, working with different functional areas across the organization. And so I think that when you think about collaboration and really expanding that definition, we've all had experiences in that. And it's not, it doesn't just mean working together. I think it means how are you stretching your skill set to take on a different perspective and look at a different problem maybe than that's outside your day-to-day purview. I mean, that's how I think about it. So I think everybody has had an experience like that, intended or unintended in their career, and trying to think about how do you highlight that could be, an opportunity that even if you feel like you haven't had a chance to work on a huge initiative across, a large organization, you can still spotlight this skill set.
I think that's really good. And you're right, it is something that can be, especially in a lot of media, they say show, not tell, but
Right.
That's not really something that you can do necessarily in an interview setting. So I love that idea of highlighting a specific example, something that you could point to. And I very much appreciate your flag there that it doesn't necessarily have to be something that was assigned as part of your duties. It might not have been an official or like a really like formalized cross collaboration. It might just be something you do in the course of your normal day.
Yeah.
And even that is really awesome because, like, frankly, you're the one driving the partnership, right? You're the one that's managing it. And so you're not only demonstrating that you have this ability, but that you have the ability to spearhead these activities. So I think that's really, really great.
And I would just add, like in larger corporations, there's a lot of opportunities for that, whether it's participating in DE&I initiatives or there's a lot of volunteer initiatives, especially at Moody's that we do through our Moody's Foundation. So these are all ways that don't have to be directly related to your day-to-day work responsibilities, but to demonstrate, your collaborative efforts and spirit.
Very cool. I like that. All right. We're getting some really great questions in the chat. If y'all have questions, please feel free to keep sending them in. This one came in from Steven. Steven said, how should employees challenge unrealistic initiatives and plans coming from someone higher up the chain? For instance, a PM that makes an aggressive schedule with no input as a tool to push workers to work harder. So let's talk about this. Does this kind of go to that idea of transparency, or do you think there's maybe some different issues at play here?
So I think it's, what motivates people, and there can be different things that motivate different people. And it's possible for, this individual having a really aggressive target and a really ambitious goal is a motivation to work harder, but that doesn't motivate everybody. Sometimes that can demotivate people because it feels unattainable. And so people want to just give up and walk away. And so I think it's about understanding the style of the manager or of the person that you're working with, and how their style may differ from your style. Before it's just about not necessarily challenging their goals, but what's their motivation for setting the target? Is it, I think that's one way to approach it without feeling confrontational. To think about it as these could just be style differences between yourself and the person who set the goals.
I like that a lot. And it kind of reminds me of something that I didn't hear until I was very far into my career journey, like probably 10 or 12 years, was that we judge other people by their actions and we judge ourselves by our intentions. And so I think it kind of goes back to that idea of being clear about, like, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, but also understanding that, like, if you are trying to get that benefit of the doubt from your team, if you want them to have that trust, then you also need to have that trust with them, or at least be demonstrating that, like, this is the way I want these interactions to go. I think that's wonderful. We also got a question. This one came in anonymously. Do you have any thoughts on keeping your camera on during Zoom meetings? This one can be very divisive. So I want to ask in the chat, if you are a camera on person, send me on in the chat. If you are a camera off person, send off in the chat. I want to know where, kind of where our group divide is here. I'm an on person, but I'm also like completely comfortable looking goofy in front of everyone for no apparent reason. How do you feel about this? Do you think there's a difference?
I think there's a big difference, but I also think it's situational. If you're in a small team meeting and there's 6 people on the Zoom and only 2 people have their camera on, I think it sets a different tone versus, on a Zoom like this where there's, 50 people, and there's some spotlighted speakers. So, but I do request for my team that we have a team meeting once a week, and that in that team meeting, everybody has their camera on. Because I think it makes a difference in terms of building trust, especially for folks that are working in a fully remote environment. If you never see your colleagues and they can't read the expressions on your face and they can't, know who you are, it makes it really difficult to create that trust, I find, because you can't read the situation. It's hard enough to read it just over Zoom, but without—
it's like a phone call. It's like being on a conference call. You don't necessarily know what someone's like. You can't necessarily read, like you said, read facial, facial expressions, or get kind of the nonverbal cues that you might have. I struggle with it even in my job, and all I'm doing is carrying on basic conversations. Yeah. So all I'm, the stuff that I struggle with is things like timing, because you don't know how far on a delay somebody might be experiencing you. And so and that's something that I do every day, and it's a relatively small thing. So, the implications for this in the wider implications across teams, across big initiatives could be huge.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's trust building, but I recognize, people do work in different locations and situations, and it can be difficult to have your camera on all the time. So I think, flexibility there, and also understanding why some folks would be more hesitant. But in those cases where people are not comfortable turning their camera on, I do encourage people to at least put a picture up, because it's very different than staring at a black box with your name, versus at least we get to have an image of you and see your face.
Yeah, no, I think that is excellent. It's something that we recommend for, our virtual job fairs, situations where you do want to have that connection, but you might not be comfortable being on camera the entire time. Have an avatar, have the AI artistic selfies and profile pictures are all the rage right now. Use one of those. It doesn't have to be like your driver's license picture levels of sterile and formal and whatever. You can have what you look like, who you are. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. Yeah. And we're seeing the divide in the chat here.
Now I see it popping up.
Yeah, a bit of both, depends on the situation. Off, but it should be consistent. Everyone should follow the same. And this is it very much. I think this is a very much it depends answer. Yeah. I love the idea of calling it out, right? And making it clear, hey, this is a meeting where if we would really appreciate you being on camera. Yeah. I've even been in meetings, especially early on when I joined Power to Fly, there was a lot of hey, you can join this meeting. We'd love it if you have your cameras on, but you don't, nobody was client facing, right? So it was much less of the inference that you were somehow not professional because you were in jammies but working. Nobody cares. Nobody ever sees me from the waist down. I've been full newscaster here for 4 years, y'all. Crazy pants and sweats and whatever, because why be uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing you just said that reminded me that some organizations don't allow employees to use their cameras, right? So I've actually been in sort of uncomfortable situations where you're on the phone with a client and there's 12 people on the phone and only the 2 people from Moody's have their camera on and everybody else is a black box. And, you're trying to build a relationship and, engage, and maybe sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but you have to respect that organizational norms can be different. And, that there could be reasons for why people are not on camera.
Yeah, that's a very good point. They might have bandwidth issues. It might be, not everybody is resourced enough to have a dedicated workspace. Not every, plenty of people that I work with especially pre-pandemic, worked out at cafes. So, having lights on or, having your camera on might not be a real feasible thing. Lorraine actually flagged something really good that I don't know that we've touched on previously, or at least I haven't in any of my chats. Lorraine says, I find that younger people in their 20s think it's fine to keep the cam off. I'm in my 60s and feel like it's disrespectful. So this is a really good point of something that would never have occurred to me, honestly. to that there might be an age, a difference of opinions depending on your age level. Obviously, we don't want to stereotype. Not everybody in their 60s believes that you have to have your camera on. But thank you so much, y'all, for sharing these comments. I love when we get to kind of learn from each other on these chats as well. Okay, so let's see here. We've got about 9 minutes left. If you have a question, get it in. I want to try and get to as many as we can. But make sure you ask early. It's the easiest way to make sure we don't miss you here. Lorraine had asked earlier, actually, sometimes there's a perceived favoritism for like-minded or similar age team members, like older people versus younger. So celebrating successes equitably can be kind of a struggle. Have you experienced this in your, in teams that you've managed? So I think this is a very interesting question, whether certain groups of the team or certain segments of the team are like more successful than others, or their work is recognized more. How have you handled this? If you've perceived an imbalance on some of your teams in the past?
Yeah, I think expectations being set on what groups can contribute what pieces to a project or day-to-day work, and clearly defining those roles and responsibilities carves out that space to be clearly, people will be clearer in understanding why this team is being celebrated, right? This is what they were being held accountable to deliver, and maybe they exceeded that goal and that target. Whereas if it's not clear, how we're defining success for each individual group, then it can feel unequitable. But I think my philosophy on recognition is to go broad and make sure I am pretty even-handed and recognizing contributions from all different teams, and not every group, because of their functional role, has the same type of contribution, right? The folks that are out there selling to customers, their goal is to bring money in the door, and they're going to get a big celebration for generating revenue for the firm. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't celebrate, maybe more operationally focused folks who help keep the networks open and running so we can all Zoom with each other every day, right? There are different contributions, but equally as important in an organization. And we need to make sure we make the space to recognize the different types of work.
I love, love, love this flag. Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you so much, Lorraine, for asking the question as well. I think that was Lorraine. Apologies if I misassigned that question. All right, last question I'm going to ask before we start to wrap up today. Has your ability to cross-collaborate served you in your professional advancement? We talked about this a little bit earlier on where you were talking about like making connections and kind of networking as you enter a new and potentially very large corporate environment. Do you think that cross-collaboration has been key to professional advancement for you? So
I'm not sure if I would say cross-collaboration has driven, opportunities for career growth, but I do think that there's a few skill sets that, have helped my professional journey and are also very significant and help a lot in collaboration. And, I think the number one is clear communication. I really view at this point in my career that within my role, probably 50 to 75% of my job is being a communicator and making sure I share information with the right people at the right time to keep people aligned and informed, and also make sure that the internal and external stakeholders have the information they need in a timely manner, and really can understand and make it easier for us to work together. I think the other one is really having the ability to influence folks and align them. For a lot of years in my career and even in my current role, I have to think about how do we get things done through influence. Not everybody who I work with every single day, is sort of under my chain of command or, control. But how do you influence people and align them and get them to understand that contributing to this program will help create successful outcomes, not only for them individually, but also for the organization. And the last one, though, I actually think is a difficult skill, but learning how to say no. And it's a really important skill, I think, in the workplace, of how to do that appropriately and professionally, but recognizing the benefits of saying no at the right time. It can help teams keep focused and maintain balance of their priorities. But it can also create accountability by not just keep piling on more and taking on more and more responsibility. So, I think for me, those are skill sets that have really helped me in my career, and also help really create an opportunity for successful collaboration.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that answer. Thank you. Okay, so we only have about 3 minutes left. I wanted to make sure we saved a little bit of time to talk more about Moody's. So what you're looking at here are some of the questions that we had asked Jocelyn about Moody's company culture before today's event started. So we talked a little bit about the company culture. You described it as curious and collaborative. And I love that your highlight for your favorite part was that there's always an opportunity to learn something new. Let's talk about your tips for someone who's interviewing. Are these Moody's specific, or are these tips that you feel apply across the board?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think they're across the board. I think showing you did your homework when you come to interview at an organization. The first thing I'm wondering is, does this person even know what Moody's does for a living? What business we're in, and how, we're a public company. And so, there's a lot of information out there to understand what we do and how our business works and operates. So I like to know that people, if they're interested in coming to work here, have taken the time to understand what we do as a business.
I like that.
And then, there are times when I interview people and I ask a question and I feel like they're just interested in making sure that they tell me about things on their resume, but it's important to just listen and make sure that the question is getting answered, and relating it back to your skills and your experiences, but not just, going off and saying what you want to say. I think demonstrates good listening skills.
I like that. Last one that I want to hark on here is send a thank you note. How do you recommend people do this? Because I come from probably the last generation of send a handwritten, stamped, addressed thank you note.
Yeah.
How do you do this now?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously preferable, but I don't think people always have the information they need to make that possible in this day and age. And I think with people in, remote workforces and spread out globally, email is perfectly fine. I think just make sure that it's a formal communication, and the intentions are there.
I like that a lot. All right, that is going to bring us to the end of time today. But Jocelyn, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us, sharing your time with us today, your expertise. We really, really appreciate it. It has been absolutely wonderful to get to know you and learn from you for the last hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thanks to Power to Fly.
Thank you to our audience members as well. Y'all are fabulous. You always bring amazing questions. I'm so grateful that y'all were keeping the chat hopping over there. Amazing questions submitted both prior to today's session as well as during. And these events don't exist without you. I don't have a job without you. So obviously I love the fact that y'all come to these. But the other thing that I want to highlight before we dive off today and we leave, pat yourselves on the back, y'all. You took an hour out of your day to do something positive for yourself and focus on yourself and focus on your career. So please don't underestimate the congratulations that you should be giving yourself for doing these positive things. A lot of us don't have a lot of time in our day. And so the fact that you chose to spend some of it with Power to Fly and great companies like Moody's is, something that we are incredibly grateful for. Thank you so much for that. We have a lot more amazing content coming to you the rest of this week, next week. So please feel free to check out, powertofly.com. I've shared a bunch of links in the chat thread where you can check out Moody's company page on Power to Fly as well. If this was your millionth Power to Fly event, if you're one of our frequent flyers, it was so nice to see you again. If you are one of our new team members or new community members, welcome. I hope that you had a wonderful time and that this is not the last time we will see you. Have a safe, happy, healthy rest of your day, and can't wait to see you on a future event. Bye, y'all.
Bye.